Hello and welcome to the Rays of Hope program brought to you by the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Child Advocacy Center. I'm your host today, Mary Foley, and I'm so glad that you've joined us for today's program as we highlight March as Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And here to help us do that are three PASAC Center staff, and I know that they're going to have lots of things to teach you about this month and to also let you know how you can be a part of the solution to end sexual violence in our community. Welcome each of you. We have Amberly, Lynn, and Angie. So I'd like to start by just letting you all introduce yourself and what you do at the center. Now, Angie, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'm Angie York and I am the prevention specialist. I work in the education department.
Well, thank you for coming. Lynn.
I'm Lynn Russell and I'm the volunteer director.
I'm Amberly Walker and I am the victim and family advocate.
Well, thank you all for coming. I happen to know your schedule very well, and I know that you are all very busy, so thank you for agreeing to come and be on the program today. Well, it is March and something that we are very familiar with at the Center of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, but our viewers may not be as familiar as we would like for them to be. So I'd like to start by just talking about the history of SAM, as we call it, and how we got to where we are today. So which one of you wants to take that on? Is that going to be Angie, the prevention specialist?
I guess everybody's looking at me, so I guess that's my job. Well, actually, Sexual Assault Awareness Month didn't really start until the 70s. I mean, this is a new movement. It hasn't been around a long time. And it started in England with actually women who'd been victimized and just people who were close to the cause started what they called Take Back the Night, and they just had marches to let people know and understand that sexual assault is a problem and they wanted to do something about it. So that sort of carried over into the United States, and we started seeing those Take Back the Night marches pop up in New York, and over the years, actually mid-ish 80s, they started to talk about how we need some way to let the whole nation know this is a problem and we want to celebrate what we can do to help these women or help survivors of sexual assault. And they did that by creating Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Now, for most of the United States, they celebrate that in April. In Kentucky, we decided to set that apart and do that in March. We actually celebrate that in March because April is Child Abuse Prevention Month as well, and there is such a great importance on letting people know about sexual assault. We feel like it deserves its own month, and that way we can kind of spread that out and give it the credit that it deserves.
Well, you know, I think that you bring up an excellent point. As the regionally designated Children's Advocacy Center and Rape Crisis Center, we will be celebrating both March and April, and we have certainly learned, as being the Children's Advocacy Center and the Rape Crisis Center, how very different, how very similar those movements are, but how very different they are, and how they certainly do need their own place to bring awareness to the scope of the problem. So thank you for bringing us up to date on that. Amberly and Lynn both, you know, before we got ready to do the program today, you all were just sort of having a conversation about really where we have come and how things have even changed, not 30 years ago, within 5 years ago. Talk to the viewer a little bit about some of the points of that conversation, just about, yes, we're here in March and we've got this awareness month, but just in general, the changes that we've seen in terms of how victims are treated and how we respond to sexual assault.
Well, as for the hospitals, I mean, they used to be that you couldn't get treatment here in this area of the state. If anything happened, you had to go to Frankfurt, to Lexington, somewhere for that exam to maintain your health.
Well, Lynn, before you even get into that, and that's an excellent point, you are the volunteer coordinator. So at the center, what does that mean? What do you primarily oversee in terms of hospital services?
I actually oversee the 24-hour crisis line, and we also oversee, it's kind of like the 24-hour crisis line where the volunteers go into the hospitals to be with that victim.
I see.
Or that survivor, so that she's not going through it alone.
So really you underscore right there a change. I mean, now the law requires that an advocate from a rape crisis center be dispatched to a hospital emergency room.
Yes, to call us when the survivor comes in.
Right. And so you're saying that years ago there wasn't a place locally to get that assistance.
There wasn't a place to even get the medical help, much less an advocate.
I see. And so really the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Children's Advocacy Center was started by nurses from Western Baptist Hospital that saw this need firsthand back in the early 80s. And so here we are in 2010, and we have a full-time staff and we have a volunteer coordinator who oversees volunteers going to the hospital. Amberly, what about you?
Well, in our conversation earlier, I was just saying how in the not too distant past, there were no victim support services, there were no victims' rights for people, and now those things are available. We can still do a better job at that, and there's still laws being passed and things to help that along. But years ago, victims were routinely escorted from the courtroom during these types of hearings. They were blamed for their own victimization. Routinely. So we have come a long way in just a short time. For a major movement, 20 or 30 years is not a long time if you think about that.
Well, I think that's a tremendous point, and you see firsthand what the environment now is like in the courtroom. And like you said, there are moments when we see glimmers of the past where we still need to be able to respond more effectively or efficiently. Right. But for the most part, what would you say to the viewer about that may be considering prosecution but maybe have those myths in their head? What would you say about the way that they're treated now?
I would say that there are those support services, that no system is perfect, but that people are aware now, you have rights as a victim now. Kentucky has adopted that into their state constitution. We have victims' rights. And also, not so long ago, there was not a time for victims to speak out, like at a sentencing, and really give how the crime has impacted them psychologically, emotionally, financially. And now all 50 states have adopted that policy that victims are allowed to speak out in the courtroom setting, at a sentencing, or before a parole board, and make a difference and be able to have a voice.
So you've been in the courtroom, as have most of us at one time or another, and we have heard those testimonies or those impact statements read. What is that like for you, even though you do this every day? What is it like when you hear a victim tell the court in front of the perpetrator sometimes how this has impacted their life?
I think it's an emotional experience. It's very humbling. It's very also empowering just to see them be able to do that and to have that time, and to watch them maybe just have been so scared about doing this, but to watch while they're being able to say, this is what happened to me, and this is how this affected me, and here's to a judge, here's what, I think, here's my opinion on the matter, and to have a judge actually listen to that, and it's just very empowering to watch that.
And, Angie and Lynn, viewers who don't know, the staff at the Purchase Area Sexual Assault Center carry on-call time. So we all provide after-hour crisis line coverage and are often dispatched to the hospital if for some reason a volunteer is unable to go. And so thinking about Sexual Assault Awareness Month, thinking about the timeline of when there were no services, Lynn, I'm going to start with you. You hear and debrief every volunteer that goes on a call. And some of their stories are pretty dramatic at times. How do you think our world would be different if that call had nowhere to go? If it were 1970 and there was no crisis line, how do you think our community would be different?
I think there would be a lot more people that were having issues. There would be a lot because the symptoms manifest themselves in different ways. We may possibly see a lot more drug abuse or alcoholism, a lot more marital problems than what we already have. Because without
even
the
child
help,
abuse,
even child abuse,
things like that, there's a correlation between that.
And Angie, we say whenever you're on call, we're going to get a call because it just seems like they land on your shift. And so even though you're not directly involved with the volunteer program, you do advocate a lot at the hospital emergency room setting for victims. Can you tell the viewer what that experience is like when you walk into that emergency room and you are there to offer support, and why a month like this is so important?
Every time I go, and believe me, I do go quite often, for whatever reason it always seems to be me, but every time I go, it's different. Even though the assault may have been what we call the same, they may have all been a rape or they may have all been a sexual harassment, whatever, we may give it one name, but each person is so different. And every time I go, the needs that they have are different, and it may be that after we leave the hospital, I'm advocating on behalf of that person in a totally different way. So it's never, even though I go a lot, it never gets monotonous because I literally never know what's going to happen. And it just goes to prove that there are so many needs, and those needs are so different. We can't really put a name on or make a list of what a victim might need when they leave the hospital or while they're at the hospital.
So for viewers that are watching that may actually have just been caught off guard by what you just said, first of all, that you would go frequently. Second of all, that there would be a great need. I think a lot of times one of the common myths that I pulled up of our coalition's website was that rape doesn't happen very often. And I think that we want to believe rape doesn't happen very often, but actually 1 out of every 6 women has been raped, and more than 50% of victims are minors when they are first raped. What this doesn't say is the research then says then they're more likely to be re-victimized later. So it does happen a tremendous amount of time, maybe more than we would like to admit. So in light of what I just read, in light of what you just said, before we take a break, I would like to hear each of you say why to the viewer from your particular perspectives is Sexual Assault Awareness Month important to have. Amberly, we'll start with you.
Well, awareness, I believe it's in the title, just awareness, because if you are just talking, just amongst my family, they have no idea that it's a problem. And you hear about hunger and poverty and drugs, and we talk about all of these things, but we don't talk about, one of the worst problems that we have in our nation. And so I think it's just important, really, for awareness.
I think you're exactly right. Lynn?
Well, instead of saying, I'm going to read something written by an anonymous survivor. It's called One of Many. In 1971, at the age of 18, I became a statistic. It was a statistic that I knew absolutely nothing about. I am one of the 1 in 4 women who will be sexually assaulted in her lifetime. I am one of the 9 out of the 10 women who never reported the crime of sexual abuse committed against me at the time. I am one of many that did not seek professional help for the devastating psychological after effects of sexual abuse. I am one of the many that after being sexually assaulted turned that anger inward and learned to abuse myself. I am one of the millions of men, women, and children who often have a profound look of sadness in our eyes. Sometimes nothing makes the painful memories go away. I am one who asked, why me? And 20 years later, God said, why not you? I will give you the strength to overcome this, and one day you will be able to help others.
Now, Lynn, let me interrupt you right there. She's getting ready to transition into the survivor piece of that right now, right? I'd like for you to hold that thought, because I'd like to, when we come back from the break, I would like to then shift our focus to survivorship and to hope and to how to be part of the solution. And what a powerful place right there. Why not you? You can help others. And I think that's the theme for Why Not You for the second half. Quickly before we take a break, Angie, why Sexual Assault Awareness Month? Why is it important?
It's great for me because traditionally, especially in our part of the state, it's hard to get into classrooms. It's hard to get in and for teachers to grasp that there is a real issue with this. And so it's easy for me to say, hey, it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and could you let us in just to talk and really promote this month? And it works. I mean, it's a good tactic for us to be able to use to spread the word that this is a problem and to talk to our kids about it. And one thing that I never ceases to amaze me when I tell kids that every 2.5 minutes someone is sexually assaulted, and I'll ask them, so in the hour that we spend talking about this today, how many people is that? How many people are going to be sexually assaulted? And their math is not always real great, but sometimes, we'll come out to around 25 people, and it really impacts them. It always makes them stop and say, oh my gosh.
And I don't want you to go away. Please stay tuned. More on Sexual Assault Awareness Month and the Purchase Area Sexual Assault Center right after the break. Hello and welcome back to the Rays of Hope program brought to you by the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Child Advocacy Center. I'm your host, Mary Foley, and we are talking about March as Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And with me today I have Angie York, Lynn Russell, and Amberly Walker, all staff of the Purchase Area Sexual Assault Center. And in the first half, for those that may just be joining us, we talked about the history of Sexual Assault Awareness Month. It's been going on since about the 70s. We've talked about how there were no victim services 30 years ago, and now victims have their place in court to be able to say how the crime has impacted them. They have an advocate that's available to go to the hospital. You're able to get into school systems to talk about the crime, and we've come a long way. And so where I'd like to go now is what I would consider some of the meat of what we're going to talk about, and that really is the services that we provide at the agency, the impact it's had on victims that we've served, and what the community can do to be a part of the solution. So let's just start there. We've been talking a little bit about the hospital. Lynn, you told us that we provide those volunteer services. Quickly again, recap what services are provided through your program at the agency.
We have a 24-hour crisis line, which is manned by trained volunteers. So anyone that has a question, whether it happened last night or 20 years ago, they can call, get somebody to listen to them, help them to figure out what might be the next step they need to take.
Okay.
We have the kind of works the same way, a 24-hour hospital advocacy program, whereas the call comes in to the volunteer, she goes to meet with that victim at the hospital, so that someone is there in that corner in her corner to support and to believe them during all of that craziness that may go on at the hospital. We also meet them at police stations if needed.
Okay. And so we readily assume that these are female victims, but really we have little boys, we have male clients. What would you say to that, to the viewer that may be thinking this is just a female-only crime as it relates to the crisis line?
Well, it obviously is not a female-only crime, because I would say roughly 25 to 30% of the calls we get are males.
Okay.
And most of the time it's things that have happened when they were kids and they're now grown-ups. But sometimes it's something that's just happened, and it doesn't always have to be, people think that males can't be raped. Well, they can, and sometimes it's male on male rape, sometimes it's female to male rape. But it does occur, and it can occur, because it shows rape is not a respecter of persons.
And actually, Lynn, I actually took a crisis call at a local hospital, and it was a male, and he was in his early 20s. Was a very humbling experience for me, because I knew what courage it took for him to say yes, contact the advocate. And his story, it was just a heartbreaking story to hear. He actually worked out of town, and different things had occurred, and he was in this situation. And so it is a myth that it's not a male crime. It is, but a lot of our little boys.
It's a human crime.
It's a human crime.
It can happen to anyone.
That's right. Amberly, talk a little bit about the advocacy services provided by the agency.
Well, really, we provide legal advocacy. Lynn mentioned the medical advocacy, and she mentioned that we meet people at police departments. So if a crime is reported, and say you go to the hospital, and then the follow-up might be the investigation part of it, we can meet victims at police stations or at our center and call the police there to do that interview if they wish to report that crime and move on forward in the legal system. And then from there, we really just provide support and education to them throughout the criminal justice system, because if you've never been involved in it, there are lots of things you're not going to understand. And so really just letting them know what happens next, attending court hearings with them, keeping them updated on what's going on with their case, helping people fill out crime victims' compensation to recuperate some of the monies maybe that they have lost, medical expenses, mental health counseling expenses. And then also assisting people with their victim impact statements and going with them to be able to make that statement in court, preparing people to testify in a trial as a witness, and just follow up after that.
So a lot actually goes into advocacy for adults and advocacy for kids. You know, you also educate kids on what the courtroom looks like and how to go through that process. Amberly, just briefly, what do you do when you have a child who originally maybe comes to the center for therapy services, perhaps a forensic service, meaning a forensic interview or a child sexual abuse exam, and it does go to trial, and they don't want to face that perpetrator. What are some things you do to help that child be prepared to testify, tell their story in front of the one they're accusing?
Well, we really a lot of education. I think if people in general, children especially, know what's going to happen and who's going to be there and what do those people do. We have a little courtroom model, and we play with that and let them kind of, be the judge or be the jury or whatever, and just educate them on who's going to be there and what that's going to look like for them, and just let them know that they are safe. Let them know all the people that are in that courtroom to protect them and to make sure that they're not to be hurt again. And that it's just their job to tell the truth, and it's not their job to win, really just to tell their story and to tell the truth. And it's really amazing because kids, I think a lot of times it's harder for the parents than it is for the children. Children are very brave, very resilient, but so we work with the parents too. But and they can do it, that they really can do it, and we might have like a little party for them afterwards or something like that, just to show how brave we thought they were.
Well, and I guess, and I watched it happen for Angie and Lynn too, I guess as I hear you talking about it, I start to get a smile on my face, because I think originally the misconception is, I can't put my child through that. But really, it is redefining winning. It is letting them have a voice. When it goes to trial, there are ways that we're able to help insulate them. And what a celebration it is when that trial goes the way we hope it does, and that child has an opportunity to speak. And I saw you all smile about the same time I did, because we've had a case recently where a little one just did so good, and so it's a free service to the community. Angie, I know that your primary task is to go into the school systems and to educate, but you have provided, along with our part-time educator, a tremendous amount of services, sometimes in 1 year, close to 10,000 students.
Last year, I think it was a little over 13,000.
Oh, it was more than I even thought. So to me, that's really where our hope for the future starts to really take its form, in that the state of Kentucky is a leader now in prevention education. Can you just talk a little bit about Green Dot? What is a Green Dot, and why does that give you hope?
Yeah, and that's what makes me smile. Green Dot. Because I have to say, I probably have the best job, because I know some of the things that we deal with at the center can get really heavy, working with our clients every day. But my job, as of late, has been to really figure out how to prevent this from happening in the first place. And, that's just a great place for me to be, to figure out what I can do so that we don't have to worry about clients, because we don't have any. And all that started with what we call the Green Dot program. And I know I've been on and talked about Green Dot a few times, but in the past few times I've talked about it, we've just kind of sat with our wheels turning, but we can't really go because of some restraints from funders and things like that. But in the past month, we are actually ready to start rolling out Green Dot, so hopefully you're going to see it all over the community. And Green Dot is basically a program. It's very simple. It can be used in pretty much any situation you find yourself in, but basically Green Dot is good and Red Dot is bad. And a Green Dot is anytime you make a choice, or you have a behavior that says, you know what, I'm not going to tolerate violence. And that's basically what it is. And a Red Dot then are those people who offend us. They're the perpetrators. They're the people who cause the violence that we have to deal with every day. And so what has happened in the last month or so with Green Dot program is the 2 schools in our area who were chosen to be part of a statewide Green Dot experiment have had to take their baseline studies, which pretty much means we've gone into those schools, we've given them some surveys, gotten some information from them to see where are you right now. And we're going to analyze that. We're going to give one school the Green Dot program, tell them all about the Green Dots and Red Dots. We're going to not give the other school the programs. We're going to test them again in a year and see, does the school that has had the Green Dot program, do we see those violence rates come down? Is there any change from the data that we took last year? So it's really exciting, and I believe it's going to work.
And you're going to do this over a 5-year period.
Yes.
So we're going to have some true research. This program always flies by, and so we're getting low on time. But what I'd like to do before we leave Green Dot is, can you give the community 3 things? What can a community member do to be a Green Dot?
Well, for our adult community members right now, I know we have lots of domestic violence bills that are trying to get pushed through the House, pushed through, lots of bills going on. So call your representatives, call your senators. That's being a green dot. That's letting people know, hey, I'm not standing up for violence. You know, if you are a child or if you have children, encourage them. If they see someone being bullied at school, tell the teacher. You know, you're not being a tattletale. You're trying to help somebody. You're being a green dot. So make sure you let somebody know. You know, if you're a high school or a college student and you see someone who's being fed drinks, someone who's getting another person drunk on purpose, find some way to distract them and get that drunk person away before they get assaulted. Okay, there's things that any age group can do.
So just practical ways to make your world more safe. Thank you, Angie. Lynn, I don't want to run out of time. I want you to finish the survivor piece written by the client, and then we'll see how much time we have after that.
She goes with, I'm one of millions that suffered in silence due to the shame and humiliation I felt. I am one that kept my secret well. But today, I am another statistic. I am a survivor of sexual abuse. I sought counseling at the center in Paducah. I finally learned to talk about it. I learned everything I could about sexual abuse, and I did the work that was necessary for me to heal. My biggest struggle was knowing that I had to forgive my abuser. It takes courage to heal. It takes strength to stand up in public and discuss something so personal. One of the most profound things I've ever been told was, are you ready to quit allowing what he did to you to control your life? When you reach that point, you are ready to begin healing. In my experience, no one gets through sexual abuse without professional help. Help is out there, just a phone call away. If you're not ready to talk to someone in person, call the crisis line, and all the volunteers are well trained and they're ready to help.
Thank you, Lynn, and I actually think that's a perfect place for us to stop, that volunteers are trained and ready to help. Thank you all for joining us for this edition of the program. And thank you to our viewers for giving us another half hour of your time to learn about Sexual Assault Awareness Month and the scope of the problem. And we challenge you to commit to yourself and to others to be a part of the solution.